When I was an executive officer in the final 2 of the 5 years that I spent working in the Air Force International Affairs Office, my alarm would go off every morning at 4:14 a.m. Now, that number may seem oddly specific to you, but for me it had a very practical intent. And that was so that when I hit the snooze button, because let's be honest, that's not a time of the day people should be waking up in order to go to their jobs, that snooze button on your average iPhone would then have that alarm go off again 10 minutes later at 4:24, which meant that the second alarm that I had already set at 4:25 would actually be enough to physically rouse me out of bed. I would leave my apartment in Northern Virginia sometime between 5:10 and 5:12, which would put me at the Roslyn Metro Station between 5:25 and 5:27. The first Blue Line train that would take me down south would arrive at 5:30, which would put me at the Pentagon at 5:40, and my desk at 5:46. Yes, that was that long of a walk. I'd have roughly 40 minutes to get ready for the day before my boss would arrive at 6:25. I'd give him about 5 minutes to sort of get situated, turn on his computer and whatnot, before I'd go in at 6:30 and badger him about all of the things that we were going to have to get done on this particular day. We'd have about an hour to work together, and then the rest of the office would start filtering in sometime around 7:30. And from there, it would be off to the races with work. Emails about changes to my boss's calendar. Phone calls about all those tasks that we were overdue on for other senior leaders. And in-person meetings to talk about the latest trials and tribulations with all of our international programs. Whether it was a couple of parts that were late because of a contractor in Georgia that ground the entire Saudi F-15 program to a halt, or the fact that the Norwegians really needed to get their C-130Js into their fleet as fast as humanly possible because they had commitments to fly in northern Afghanistan. Now, most days I would be engulfed in this vortex of work, and I would emerge only to realize that the day had already passed me by. Now, sometimes that would be at 5:45 p.m., sometimes at 7, sometimes at 9. And regardless of what time I finished, I would oftentimes than not take myself home, fall down on my couch and try to catch a hockey game through a couple of pairs of very heavy eyelids, maybe have some dinner, try to play a video game or two, and get to sleep somewhere around 11 p.m. And each night, as I would go to sleep, advice that was given to me by one of my mentors who advised me before taking this job would be on my mind. Remember, if you broke even, that was a good day. This is the bureaucrat's world. A desperate search each and every day just to break even. Now, breaking even on its very simple level is just saying that you got as much work done as had accumulated throughout the course of a day. But what it really meant as a bureaucrat was that you had a sense of control over the work that you were doing, and that it was progressing at a pace that you and your organization felt comfortable and satisfied with. What was the difference between breaking even and not? Well, it's the same difference between 4:14 in the morning and 3:14, between 11 p.m. and midnight, between Saturday with your friends and family and Saturday at the office. Now, I'll forgive you if this is not the first narrative that probably jumps to your mind when you saw the word bureaucrat listed on my first slide. Regardless of where you're from, except maybe for our friends in the audience from Singapore, hi Shoko, bureaucrats around the world are described in terms that we'll call less than glowing. Words like lazy, incompetent, entitled, ineffective. I could go down an entire list because frankly I've heard them all. But President Obama has a very good perspective on this, and a number of other people in the policy world do. And they see two kinds of people in the bureaucrats' world. The ones who want to be and the ones who want to do. The ones who want to be, regardless of our professions, we've all dealt with people like that. We all know them. Avoid them if you can, because all they're going to do is just get in your way. But the ones who want to do, those are the stars in the bureaucrats' world. And from my experience working on the inside, the number of people whose schedules and lives mirrored and were similar to mine are a lot more common than you might think. On countless occasions, I witnessed people in my organization and around the federal government lie on their timesheets about how much they worked. Not to say that they had worked more than they actually had, but intentionally obscuring the fact that they had worked a 50 or a 60-hour week. Why would they do that? Because government organizations didn't have money to pay overtime. And those hours were what was needed to get the job done. Those were the hours that were needed to break even. Now, what happens as a result of living in this kind of an environment and functioning at a high level means that bureaucrats are focused almost exclusively on putting out proverbial bureaucratic fires. Their focus is on how to operationalize ideas rather than necessarily coming up with them. Their focus is on how to best bring them into reality, whether an idea is feasible and doable, whether it's legal, and if it fails, if it's up to the bureaucrat's fault, that they're liable for it. If it's an idea that they even have the most tiny shred of authority or influence over. Because ideas which are none of those things are just a distraction for a bureaucrat from other urgent priorities, which are. And it is these bureaucrats that you in the academy need to reach in addition to policymakers. Because bureaucrats are the ones that are giving policymakers the advice, guidance, and situational awareness that they need to make decisions. Because policymakers' portfolios are too vast for one elected or appointed official to handle on their own. Furthermore, bureaucrats are the ones that are going to have to sustain their efforts each and every day through turf battles and conflicting priorities, and the fact that that tiny problem yesterday just blew up into today's major crisis. Oftentimes, the difference between an idea which succeeds and fails in the bureaucrat's world is a question of pure will on the part of its supporters on the inside. So how can you in the academy reach these stars? The key is accessibility. At the risk of beating a dead horse even deader, political characterology is probably not something that's going to rise to the top of a bureaucrat's reading list. It'll oftentimes, or more oftentimes than not, get lost amidst the shuffle of paper or forgotten after a late night work session. But short, digestible pieces, as we've already talked about a little bit today, in blogs, as Maria pointed out, or in podcasts, or in magazines, those are the kinds of things that a bureaucrat can fit into the rigors of their daily battle rhythm. And for you in the academy, it is going to be frustrating and galling to try to reduce all of the nuances of the issues that you deal with on a daily basis to fit inside of a blog post or a tweet. But as the great author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the author of The Little Prince, once said, a designer knows he has achieved perfection not when there is nothing left to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. Second, working in the bureaucrat's world, as has already been discussed by Raoul, is also very important as a method of making inroads. Now, when a star bureaucrat assesses an academic, skepticism is raised at the slightest hint of ivory towerism. A person who has a lot of really brilliant ideas and absolutely no clue about how to implement them or who's responsible for it or the challenges that are inherent in doing that, they're not seen as visionaries, they're seen as distractions. But for a person that's worked inside the bureaucrat's trenches, who knows the challenges that they faced, and who's built a personal reservoir of mutual trust and respect, the value of that trust and respect cannot be understated. Oftentimes, a personal relationship is the only difference between put that on my to-do list and, well, hopefully we'll have time for it later. As I'm sure, as has already been mentioned, when Professor Kelly Sims Gallagher took sabbatical from Fletcher in order to broker the US-China climate deal, or Professor Klein to be the chief economist in the International Affairs Office of the US Treasury, the results of working in this world can truly be extraordinary. So please, professors, take advantage of those sabbatical opportunities that you get to work inside the bureaucrat's world. For the students in the room, intern for public sector organizations between your summers while you're here at Fletcher or elsewhere. Volunteer for public sector organizations in your own local communities. And those bonds will carry you a lot further than you can appreciate right now. And lastly, there is no real replacement for an in-person meeting. Now, for everyone in this room and for elsewhere that has dealt with these kinds of meetings before, they can be frustrating for a whole host of reasons. The amount of time that's budgeted is never enough to truly address the problem in depth. The meeting has to start late because the principal's running late, or has to leave early because the previous meeting which ran late meant that they're late for their next one. Or my personal favorite that's happened to me more times than I'd like to admit, the meeting gets canceled while you're physically sitting in the room. But those frustrations belie a greater truth, which is that your ideas are important enough to fit into a day whose sole characteristic is comprising of bureaucratic chaos. So when you do get that time, take advantage of it. Speak quickly and incisively about the issues at hand. Focus on the actions that need to be done as opposed to the merits of the ideas themselves. And volunteer yourself to help try to get things done, to do the hard work to actually implement. And also, if you see someone roughly my age sitting in the back row supporting the bureaucrat, furiously typing away on a BlackBerry, don't take it as an insult. They're not trying to ignore you. They're just trying to break even. Now, understanding this world and how to approach it is important for making your ideas a reality. And that's important not just for you and your career. It's important for the world. Because public sector organizations' missions are too important and time too limited and resources too few to waste them on doing things in an ineffective and inefficient way. So please, people in the academy, go out and find those stars, because they're the ones that are going to take time out of their very busy days to get things done. The ones who are going to hustle despite all of the challenges and roadblocks that they face while they're working. And the ones who move heaven and earth for things that they believe in. And if you reach them in a way that they can understand and internalize, then it'll be your ideas on their minds when they're hitting the snooze button at 4:14 in the morning. And you'll have found the greatest champions you could ever find in the bureaucrat's world.